Okay, so welcome everyone. Delighted to have you with us at our free webinar on parenting your child with ADHD. So I'm Majella Marr, Dr. Majella Marr. I'm a principal specialist psychologist with Centric Mental Health. And this is my colleague, Dr. Danny O'Sullivan, our clinical director. So we, as I say, are very happy to be here to present this webinar to you this evening. And really with a focus on understanding connection and strength-based support for your child.
Yeah, thanks very much, Majella, and thanks to everybody for taking some time out on the busy evening to come and join us tonight. So we hope that you get something useful out of the session tonight, and we'll have a bit of time at the end, I hope, to answer any questions that may come up. So if you have any questions, you can pop them in the Q&A section. So we'll get started. Majella, you might give us a bit of an overview on what to expect over the next 45 minutes or so.
Yeah, so our agenda for this evening, what we want to do is we're going to cover 5 key topics. So hopefully will help you better understand and support your child with ADHD. And we're going to start by exploring differences within the ADHD brain and how these differences affect your child's cognitive functioning, behaviors, and emotions. And then we'll move on to understanding how these brain differences impact your child's emotional experiences and their ability to manage intense emotions. This is also known as emotional dysregulation. Then we'll move to the lovely behavior iceberg. It's a lovely metaphor that we'll use to explore what's going on beneath the surface. So the tip of the iceberg is what the behavior is, what we see, and then what's underneath the surface is perhaps understanding the needs of your child and what they're actually communicating through their actions. Then after that, we're going to introduce you to a practical skill called mentalization. And mentalization will really help you understand and connect with your child's inner world using lots of curiosity and empathy to do that. And then finally, we're going to explore evidence-based parenting approach, one that is compassionate and boundaried, so that warm boundaries, that firm holding place. So really the goal of the presentation this evening is to give you 3 takeaways, 3 key takeaways, which will hopefully help change how you understand and support your child, including some practical parenting strategies. And then we're just going to, as Danny said, we're going to wrap up with time for a Q&A at the end.
Great, thanks, Majella. So I think, yeah, we're going to kick off by looking a little bit at ADHD, the ADHD brain, because this forms a really important context for the rest of the talk tonight. So ADHD, it was originally classified as a behavioral disorder because a lot of the differences were manifested in sometimes challenging behaviors. So the stereotype is the hyperactive child who's bouncing off the walls and causing difficulty in school settings and so on. And I guess, you know, this classification as a behavioral disorder, it invoked a lot of kind of psychological or even environmental explanations, like, you know, it's just bold behavior or it's due to bad parenting. But I guess we've learned that with advances in neuroscience and in having a better understanding of genetics, ADHD has more recently become conceptualized as a neurodevelopmental difference. So what does this really mean? It reflects underlying biological factors, psychological and social factors. So it helps us understand that ADHD, it affects how the brain develops and how it works. And we know this from a lot of imaging studies where at a group level, we're able to see differences in regions such as the prefrontal cortex here. So this is the area kind of behind and above your eyes. And we know this area is implicated in tasks like planning, problem solving, self-monitoring, and impulse control. And of course, there are differences in the ADHD brain, in the emotional centers and the memory centers. So that's here, it's like deep in the center of your brain, areas like the amygdala and the hippocampus. And we know these areas are implicated in emotion processing and committing, I guess, information to memory. What we also have learned is that children with ADHD and adults too have differences in how these parts of the brain communicate with each other. And they communicate via neurotransmitters or brain chemicals. Brain chemicals like dopamine, like norepinephrine. We know they impact attention, arousal, reward, and motivation. So, for example, communication between these brain areas, that kind of captures what your child is interested in and what they attend to. And it also covers how they will commit that information to memory, like what triggers their emotions and how they manage and inhibit their responses by these prefrontal cortex. And we know that, for example, in children, that control center of the brain takes a little bit longer to develop in children with ADHD. So understanding these differences are really critical to getting a sense of, for example, why children with ADHD have difficulty, say, paying attention to certain things, why they experience big emotions, and how they have difficulties managing all of this. And so essentially, what we need to think about ADHD is about arousal regulation, how they pique their interest in things, but also how they manage when those emotions are in full flow. So this leads us into understanding emotional dysregulation. And many parents with kids who have ADHD will be acutely familiar with the challenges that they often face, not just experiencing those intense emotions, but also managing them and responding to them. So we know that people with ADHD experience emotions more intensely, and also that responding and managing those emotions using the frontal brain area can be much more challenging. I guess when we think about those emotional centers in the brain, when your child becomes emotionally overwhelmed, when they're experiencing tantrums or meltdowns, that amygdala, that emotional center of the brain, is on fire. There's a furnace burning in that part of the brain, so to speak. But also the frontal part of the brain, those decision-making, rational parts of the brain are basically offline. So this is why, for example, a child with not just ADHD, and children with neurodevelopmental differences often experience these big, intense emotions. And you'll know from experience that it's very hard to reason with them when they're in that state. It's like their decision-making capacity has kind of left them. And so the differences in the brain help us understand what's going on. They're not deliberately trying to make life difficult for you, or trying to be kind of naughty or uncooperative. It's that storm that's going on in their brain. And I think understanding that is really important. And of course, in that state, they can often impulsively lash out and then struggle to calm down afterwards, because the intensity of that emotional experience, that furnace is burning strong. And so it takes a long time for that to calm down. So helping your children with ADHD understand this, helping them to develop the emotional literacy, to name how they're feeling, and then to kind of regulate those emotions, like cooling the furnace, if you like, is so important to helping them manage their emotions. And I guess this leads on to this idea of the behavior iceberg. And, Magella mentioned this, and I think the iceberg itself is it's a very apt metaphor and analogy for ADHD and the behaviors that occur with that. So really, the behaviors that we see, the things that perhaps led ADHD to be classified as a behavioral disorder, this is the oppositionality, the shouting, the hitting, the avoidance. This is what we see on the surface, and this is perhaps what creates the challenges. But in order to understand what's going on, we need to delve deeper. We need to look beneath the surface of the behavior. So that, the tip of that iceberg is obvious. We can all see it. These are the behaviors that cause children with ADHD a lot of challenge, and that bring them to the attention of, parents, teachers, friends, and so on. But underneath that, there can be a range of unmet needs. These are those big emotions I just spoke about. It could be sensory overwhelm, if they're in a noisy environment, or an environment with kind of lighting that doesn't suit their sensory profile. They might be experiencing a lot of anxiety about, say, attending school or taking that test. They can experience perceptions around, social rejection, shame, of course, which is incredibly disabling. They can feel out of control, and they can feel frustrated. So we need to delve deeper to understand what's driving those behaviors. And in a little while, Magella is going to speak a little bit more about how to do that using mentalization. Any thoughts on that, Magella?
On the behavior? Well, I think the behavior, you described that very well, because it's very easy to see the behaviors.
Yeah.
And but what's not as easy to see is all of those unmet needs that underlie that behavior, and all of the challenges that your child is experiencing. So I think, really, really important that we look further down, that we really try and understand, what's creating the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, what's driving it. And being aware then of some of those common triggers. So like these might, when we say triggers, what we really mean are, what happens right before, your child becomes upset or becomes overwhelmed or has a meltdown. And, that can be a clue as to, what's going on. And sometimes it's things like, transitions from a preferred activity to a non-preferred activity. So maybe it's like screen time to homework is a big trigger. It could be sensory overload. It might be fatigue. So if they've spent the whole day at school trying to hold things together, trying to concentrate on class, managing the behavior, by the time they come home, they might be just exhausted. They might be hungry, they might have this strong kind of perceived unfairness, which we know is common in children with ADHD, and that kind of threat sensitivity. And, again, Magella, you'll talk a little bit later on about, when children are being kind of corrected and criticized constantly, they're going to have their defenses up, they're going to have their guard up, and that can make it difficult to connect with them. But essentially what we need to begin to understand is, in those situations where the demands of the situation exceed their capacity to manage it, that we might see the manifestation of that in some of these behaviors. And so as a parent, your role is to be a detective, to delve beneath the surface and really try and understand what's the message behind the behavior that you're seeing, rather than just reacting to the behavior itself, or being a judge about that behavior. So I think this leads quite nicely on to the next section, Magella.
Yes. So our next section, which we talk about, so it's mentalization and connection. So what do we use to help us gain that deeper understanding of our child's behavior? So mentalization really is what we call a bridge into your child's inner world. So we all have mental states. Our mental states are our thoughts, feelings, motivations, intentions, and they underlie all behaviors. So Danny just talked about that on the iceberg. The behaviors that you see, that's above the surface, but all of these things, these mental states, are driving the behavior. And really, mentalization is really about understanding those mental states, the thoughts, the feelings, and behaviors, not only our own, which is really important, but also understanding our child's feelings, thoughts, and intentions. So mentalization is a deliberate skill which can be practiced to help you as a parent understand the mental states of yourself and others. And I think as a parent, we can use this skill very nicely, as I said, to really gain access into our child's world, to kind of step in their shoes, to see the world from where they're sitting, where they're standing, with all of those mental states interacting and acting. So it really is about approaching your child with curiosity, as Danny said, not judgment. You know, as parents, we're quick to judge. But instead of judging, maybe asking, consider, like, I wonder what's happening for you right now. You know, that will help your child to feel heard and understood, rather than reacting in a kind of a punitive way. So it's that piece of practicing that reflection, and reflecting their emotions back to them. That's kind of validation. You know, if we reflect our child's emotions back to us and name how they're feeling, that's validating their experience. For example, you could say, oh, I feel you're upset right now because you weren't invited to your friend's birthday. And I understand that that would make you feel very sad. I mean, something like that immediately, first of all, puts your child at ease because they hear that you understand them, you know, you're connected to them. And it also creates such a lovely sense of safety. So you're creating that safe space where they can feel comfortable talking to you, telling you how they feel, even the big ones, even the difficult ones. So, I mean, it's not emotion regulation is not that's helping them to co-regulate. And we all need to learn how to co-regulate before we learn our regulation within ourselves. But our job isn't ever to stop the feeling. Our job is to help them to feel safe while they're experiencing the feeling. And as we say, children, particularly children with ADHD, but you know, most children really struggle with these big emotions. Like they don't know what to do with them because it's all new. So making that emotional connection first is a really important step. So you're there, you're validating, they know that you hear them, they feel heard, they feel seen. So if we create that emotional connection with them, we then can try and correct the behaviors that are inappropriate. So this will help your child feel heard and understood. So that lovely mentalization piece really creates that connection with your child. Anything you want to add to that, Danny?
Yeah, no, just I think you've touched on something quite important there, which is all about you know, the mentalization is not just about trying to understand what's going on for your child, but it's really reflecting on what's going on for me right now. You know, we've all been in that situation before where we just incredibly frustrated as a parent, you know, and you know, we might kind of snap at our children or respond or react to the behavior. And, you know, oftentimes we're kind of just adding fuel to the fire. You know, it's not helping the situation. And you know, I've done it myself and I continue to do it myself. But you know, really when we kind of react with a strong emotion because that's what's going on for us, that tends not to help the situation. And you know, I know you tend to get into that battle, you know. So I think what's really nice about the mentalization piece is like, it does prompt you to kind of to kind of reflect, to think, okay, what's going on for me right now? What's going on for my child? What's beneath the surface,
Yeah. Thanks. Yeah. So that mentalization piece, so lovely. And so how do we put it into practice? Because it is a wonderful skill to learn, and it makes a ton of difference when you're trying to work with your child. So we have 3 steps. It's a 3-step parenting approach, okay, using the mentalization skills here. And this is really, as I said, a powerful tool because it helps you not only to respond with empathy, but it's also very effective when you use it with your child. So if we look at the first step there, the first step is pause and reflect. And this is about us as a parent pausing, reflecting just for a moment, and it can happen really quickly. We tune into our own mental states, our own thoughts, feelings, and intentions because they're always active. And you ask, what's going on for me right now? And then you wonder, what's going on for my child? What might they be thinking right now? What might be going on underneath this behavior that I'm witnessing? Rather than just kind of reacting, which again, I think all parents do this. We're human after all. But the key to the first step is to make the situation no worse, as Danny said. Do not add fuel to the fire because, as Danny had said there a couple of slides ago, when we're in emotional overload, which are those really intense emotions that our kids feel, particularly children with ADHD, because of the way that the brain is wired and their capacity really not to be able to manage those. So emotional mind, basically, they're in emotional overload. So rational mind, as Danny said, is completely offline. So there's no access. So we can't reason with children when they're in this state. So the first step, as we say, is to make the situation no worse. Because if we start to reason, our child will not see it as reasoning. They'll see it as, more, we'll push them more into threat. So don't
And
add fuel to the fire. Sorry, Danny.
yeah, just as a thought, Magella, do you have it? Because again, I'm sure that in these moments, like there's times where your child would be frustrated and stressed and overwhelmed, but in a lot of those situations, we as parents are in the same state, so we're stressed, we're kind of late, and your child is kind of doesn't have their shoes on, and you're trying to pack the bag, so we're already in that stress state, and we're primed to kind of just to snap or respond to the behavior in a kind of a critical or a punitive way. And look, we're all under pressure. It does it's hard in that moment to actually pump the brakes a little bit and take a breath. I mean, is there anything that you could say about that might help parents with that piece? Just even the first part of that.
Reflecting on our own inner states.
Yeah, it's almost like maybe it's a case of just taking a moment, just prompting themselves to kind of just, okay, before I say anything, I'm just going to pump the brakes, and like take a breath, and that it's about buying yourself a minute, just so you don't kind of react, and as you say, add fuel to that fire.
You don't get a minute, Danny.
Yeah, fair enough.
There is no minute.
Yeah.
So just that pause, and I mean that's really hard. Pressing that
Yeah.
button is going to be
Yeah.
really hard. It's going to take practice. But pressing that button on pause, checking in with yourself, wondering about your child, and then, empathize, like putting empathy into action. Like, how do we do that? Well, name and validate your child's feelings. And also reflect your own feelings in the moment. So we're paying attention to what their behavior is bringing up in us, and also perhaps why they're acting out in this way. So you're doing 2 things. So you check in with yourself, you name your own feeling. For example, you might say, you might think, well, I know that I'm feeling frustrated because you're not getting ready, we're going to be late again, it's always the same. So that might be something you're thinking of. And yet you want to be able to wonder, well, what is it that's going on for my child? Why are we still in the same pattern over and over again? And there's a reason. They're not just doing it to annoy you. It's because of some little thing within their emotional system that they can't reach or they can't manage. And so therefore, we have to empathize and we have to show them. You see, kids, when they're in that emotional state, as I said, emotional mind has hijacked the brain. It's really in control. And so at that time, if we react in a way that's punitive or annoying or maybe aggressive, sometimes we can be, our children is going to learn that that's the way to react. You see, because their own emotional system isn't just ready and probably smooth, they're going to borrow our nervous system in that time. So if we're acting out of that in a kind of a punitive, accusatory, I don't know, punitive way, that's what they're not going to be able to borrow the calmness. Whereas if we to action, we pause, we slow down ourselves, we are acting out of that calm place. Our children is going to, our kids are going to connect with that. And that's what they're going to learn. So remind yourself, they're borrowing your nervous system. And so if your nervous system is off the wall, then that's what they're going to feel as well. I think that's really important.
So that kind of mirroring, which happens,
Modeling, model,
for sure.
mirror. Yeah.
And if we react quite strongly, then that's how they're going to respond as well. It's like upping the ante each time, And I think, another important part about the empathizing piece, and I think it's not just empathizing from the point of view of like, oh yeah, I get it. They're stressed and overwhelmed. It's actually really purposefully, imagining yourself in their position, uh, uh, feeling overwhelmed, but also maybe not quite fully understanding what's going on. So by actually, labeling that emotion for them, you're giving them the vocabulary to understand their own inner world. And, that's, that's kind of one of the core parts of being a parent, isn't it? It's kind of, helping your child understand what's going on, their inner emotional world. And by labeling those different feelings, and just saying them out, I can see, you're feeling really frustrated right now. You're clenching your fists and you're really angry. Let's take a minute to kind of calm down and just kind of bring things down a little bit. And sometimes, the pausing and reflecting, it might mean doing nothing. It might mean just giving them a little bit of time to work through that big emotion or to calm down. And at other times, it might involve kind of that co-regulation, just helping them to come back down, using various co-regulation strategies. And then, of course, go ahead, yeah.
Yeah, that brings us then to the guide, not control, that third piece. And so this is about not controlling your child, because we can't. It's not helpful. When you guide your child, you support the development of self-awareness within them. And that's what we want to do. We want them to develop self-awareness and be able to make their decisions rather than, trying to only pay attention to what's being thrown at them. You see, by attempting, if we attempt to eliminate the behavior without understanding what's underneath it, what's the function of it, if we try to eliminate it without understanding that, then the underlying need will remain unmet, most likely, and very likely it'll be expressed in another way. So, we often see these behaviors leaking out in different areas of our lives, in relationships, in all sorts of situations. And that's because that unmet need is still there. So all I would say is don't engage in a battle of wills with your child. Remember, always remember that your goal is always to build connection rather than controlling your child or crushing their will. And this approach, I think, will really help you to understand your child's perspective. Remember, you're trying to step into your child's shoes, looking at the world through their eyes. And then that will help you respond in a way that really supports their emotional development. So that brings us on to parenting with strength. And I think this is a really nice slide because it really is important. Parenting with strength doesn't mean that you're, a big aggressor and you're the one that's making all the decisions. It's a strength that you create this world for your child, a world that's safe, consistent, flexible, warm. So this parenting approach, it's like approaching your child with curiosity rather than criticism all the time, or the need to constantly correct them. I mean, we know in our experience from working with children who have ADHD, like very often they experience a lot of negative feedback in their lives, from teachers, from soccer coaches, from maybe peers in the playground, or, so already when we jump into correction and jump into that criticism, we are just piling on that stress for them. And we're actually throwing them into shame. And Danny mentioned it earlier. Shame is it's one of the most destructive primary emotions that we have. And because it says that I am bad. That's what shame is. Not that I did something bad. It's I am bad. And look, we're all surrounded by shame. We're all full of shame. But I think, really remembering that the more we criticize and the more that we try and correct all the time, most likely we are going to shove our child into threat. And again, when we're in threat, we're in survival mode. Survival mode means, we're not thinking about anything except protecting ourselves. So we get defensive. And we often see that again with children, like that battle of wills. They are stubborn, they don't want to give up, they insist that they're right. That's when they feel threatened. And so they act defensively. And we all do it, not just children, we all do it. So
that's really interesting, that point about being in that threat mode, isn't it? So when you're criticized, and as you say, like you've got your guard up, and of course when you're in that state, it's very hard to make a connection with somebody, and so that almost kind of precludes that connection piece, doesn't it?
Exactly. Yes, exactly. Because when you're in threat, you're not open to that because your body, you don't feel safe. So therefore that connection can't take place. So I think really nice maybe to build a strong connection with your child. This is a nice skill of kind of remembering the 4-to-1 ratio. So aiming for affirmative or constructive interactions for every one corrective or a negative interaction. So then that's what they remember. They'll remember the positive, they'll remember the affirmative ones, they remember the ones that they felt good in. So I think that's a really nice skill to bring. Make sure that you do that. 4-to-1 ratio is really nice and really important. And I think part of building the connection with your child involves establishing boundaries, but boundaries with empathy. Boundaries are one of the most critical things that we can give our children. Children crave boundaries. Boundaries make them feel safe. They make their lives predictable. And so, a life without boundaries is often feels chaotic and unpredictable, feels unsafe. Firm boundaries, and these are with warmth, empathy, but they're that kind of feeling of, I'm safe, like, mom and dad are here, even if my world is awful in other places or feels unsafe or feels sad or whatever, then I know that when I'm home, this is what I can expect. The consistent use of these lovely, warm, firm boundaries that are flexible, because we can't have tight boundaries, because otherwise we're dictators and that never works. So it's the kind of the authoritative piece. It's that lovely piece where your child feels safe and heard and held, and yet we know that as parents, we have to provide guidance, pathways, rules, all of that to our children in order to help them to grow and develop.
Yeah. And you know, kids will test boundaries, of course, as we know, and as you say, you know, having boundaries is what they need, but their job is to test those
Yeah.
boundaries, as we know. And you know, what they're doing is they're kind of getting a sense of, okay, where are the limits here? Because, you know, if there are no limits, as you say, Magella, the world can often feel very scary and chaotic to young kids. If the limits are too tight, they're constrained, so that zone for them to grow and develop and learn is constrained, so they can't do it. So I think it's about trying to get that balance right, that Goldilocks zone, isn't it, of the consistent
Just right.
boundaries, yeah, that are just right, that allow enough flexibility and freedom for the child to go and explore the world and to make mistakes and to, you know, learn where those boundaries are. And I think that's incredibly important. So, you know, I think often sometimes when we talk about pausing and reflecting and validating, that can be confused with like permissive parenting, which is just, oh, give your kids whatever they want and, you know, let them stay up late and give them access to their phones and social media and let them eat as many sweets as they want or whatever. And there's a difference here, isn't there? This is about like being consistent with your boundaries, but doing so with that kind of, you know, that empathy and that warmth. And I guess, of course, you know, we also want to, if possible, avoid a punitive approach.
Yeah.
Because I guess, you know, it's not always clear that, you know, punishments are effective. I mean, all punishment really teaches is, you know, what not to do. Um, and also the effects don't often last very long. And one of the mistakes that I think us as parents, and I make it myself, you know, when you kind of try and impose a punishment, but there's no relationship between the punishment and the behavior. You know, it's like, oh, you did this, you know, bold thing, and so next weekend you're not going to your friend's house. Like there's absolutely no connection between those two things. So often there's no learning. Um, but you know, I think so. So we need to be careful about using punishment as a learning tool for our kids, and because oftentimes in a punitive or in an authoritarian regime, people only learn not to get caught. You know, so they still go about their business, but they maybe do it in not as obvious a way. And so I guess what we want to focus on is that strength-based approach, isn't it? It's kind of being there, being solid, being consistent, you know, celebrating your child's differences and their abilities, teaching them new skills and encouraging their autonomy, really, and independence. So allowing them to make decisions for themselves, allowing them to make mistakes, um, helping them to manage their behavior. I think this is what really kind of helps them grow and prepare for life. And if we wrap them up too much, if we kind of have those boundaries too tight and constrained, we actually disable them. We don't allow them the opportunity to learn how to manage those big emotions, to make mistakes, to explore their world and so on. And so, you know, getting that balance,
It's
it's
leading with
important.
strength. It's leading
Yeah,
with strength, not shame. Yeah.
completely. And
Yeah.
I guess just to kind of finish on the fact that, like, as we know, like there's no such thing as the perfect parent. You know, everybody makes mistakes. I constantly make mistakes, and I'm kind of, you know, I try to make up for it. You know, so I think when you do, it's about modeling that positive response, which I think is important. So, you know, if you've snapped at your child, or if you've been unreasonable, or if you've imposed a kind of an illogical kind of punishment, apologize, say, look, I'm sorry, I didn't get that right. I was just kind of frustrated. I was overwhelmed, and reflect on maybe what you can do better the next time. But also, like, don't beat yourself up when you make a mistake. It's going to happen. It's going to happen continuously. And as we know with relationships, the most important thing is to constantly repair and rebuild.
Mhm.
Anything you want to add to
No,
that,
I
Majella?
think that's great. Yeah.
Yeah. So look, this brings us on to our final slide, really. We really want to just reiterate what we've covered tonight, and like, we're going to wrap things up and by emphasizing those three key takeaways, those messages that we'd like you to take with you, to remember. And hopefully you'll have a bit of time to reflect on this after the talk, and hopefully take a few notes and try some of these things out for yourself. But the first and the most important thing to realize is that your child's brain may be wired a little bit differently. Like, we're all wired differently, as we know. But for kids with ADHD, autism, other neurodevelopmental differences, we know that those differences are evident. And this means, they're not deliberately trying to make your life more difficult. They're just maybe not able to see things from your perspective at this point just yet, So there so much is going on in their developing brain, those big emotions, learning how to manage those. And this is a process which takes time, and I think that guidance is just so important to help them with that process. So we need to approach their emotions and the challenges that they're experiencing with understanding and with patience, just bearing in mind some of those differences. I guess the second key message we'd like you to take away is that skill that Majella introduced to you in mentalization. So this is really about giving yourself that bit of time. Yeah, it might be a minute, maybe it's a few seconds, Majella, a few seconds to pause and reflect on what your child might be feeling in that difficult moment. Pause and reflect on what's going on for you in that difficult moment. You'll feel yourself maybe getting frustrated or heating up, and then put that empathy into action. So, that means naming their feelings, naming your own feelings, naming their feelings, and showing them that you understand, and helping them to realize that, look, having those feelings is okay. It's uncomfortable, but it's okay. And you're going to be there with them and for them. And, I guess, the third part of that three-step parenting approach is guiding, trying not to control. So don't get into a battle of wills with them. Really, as much as possible, facilitating them to make decisions, to manage their emotions. And that will depend on how old and as they mature developmentally. So remember that the behaviors that we model, they mirror. So bear that in mind. So finally, we want to emphasize the importance of that approach, parenting with strength. So this doesn't mean, as Majella said, you're not the enforcing authority, nor are you the kind of permissive, completely laissez-faire parent. It means setting clear boundaries, but doing so with empathy. So this allows us to kind of focus on our child's unique strengths, encourage their autonomy, and help them to grow. So this, I guess, brings us to the end of our talk.
Yeah, maybe we can take 5 minutes for if anyone has any questions or comments or anything, and maybe we'll just leave this slide up, because Danny and I run a 6-week program, parenting a child with ADHD, and I mean, we go through each of the.
Yeah, I mean, we've kind of given maybe a small taster of some of the areas that we cover in the program. And look, we hope you enjoyed tonight and got something out of it. And as I said, if you think you'd be interested in spending more time exploring some of these areas, learning some of these skills, yeah, we cover these in the 6-week program. So
And many more,
for
and
sure.
many more.
Do you want to say a bit about that, Magella, some of the things
Well,
that we
I mean,
dive into?
yeah. So we learn about the functions behind your child's behaviors, how to use positive behavior support strategies to help them reduce the triggers and then respond more effectively. And also, how to teach your child more adaptive skills. And it also covers effective emotional regulation strategies, and we touched on those this evening. And so that you can practice those then with your child, you'll learn practical problem solving strategies. And these are to help your child, to help them navigate challenges
Mm.
like at school and in social situations. We'll discuss
Because
the importance, of
yeah,
neuroaffirmative and strength-focused language when communicating with and about your child, because we know that it's very deficit-based and the whole thing around it. So we want to change that, how we talk about ADHD or neurodivergence in a positive way. And of course, we can never have a group for parents without attending to self-care, because it is difficult being a parent anyway, full stop. And when you have a child with maybe extra needs or different challenges, it's even more challenging for a parent. So really, we spend a week, one of the weeks, focusing on really self-compassion for yourself. How do you take care of yourself in all of this? So our next group, it starts on Monday the 29th, and it is run online between 12:30 and 2. And there's some information on that slide if you feel like you would like to enroll in that. Please do so by emailing or calling. But I think maybe we should jump straight in. We have maybe a few minutes if anybody would like to ask a question.
There is a question in the chat, Majera. I don't know if you
Okay.
can see it.
oh, I see it here. Yeah,
Can you take
yeah.
that, Danny, then?
So
I
yeah,
can't see it.
sure. Let me see. So Lou, it's okay if I read it out. My son continuously uses really bad language towards us when angry. I know I'm triggered as I was not allowed to curse as a kid. Okay, so it's really having an impact on the parent. I tried to explain the feeling beneath this to him, but I'm so angry that he speaks to me like that. Do I just need to keep giving him language around feelings or implement consequences which don't work? Yeah. Well, look, that's interesting, Lou, and I'm sure you're not the only parent experiencing that. Look, you've named it yourself there at the end, trying to implement consequences around, bad language or other behaviors that you may not want to see doesn't usually work. And there's a couple of reasons for that. It brings us back to what you touched on, Magella, about, trying to understand what's going on beneath the surface and the function of a behavior, So, for example, Lou, if your child in that moment of feeling angry, they feel out of control. So one of the most powerful things that we can do when we're not feeling in control ourselves is to try and elicit some kind of control over the environment and others in it. And one of the underlying functions that we touch on in the program is about social attention. Now, this kind of has negative connotations when we say, oh, somebody's just looking for attention. Like, we all look for attention. We all need social connectedness. We all need to feel like we're kind of active agents. And so doing things to elicit the attention of other people is very important. It's a very important social skill. So it sounds like your child is kind of in this moment of feeling really angry. He knows that this using bad language will trigger you. So what I would suggest, Lou, is that just going back to some of the steps we focused on today is like, taking that moment to pause and reflect and not adding fuel to the fire. My sense is that when you react, it maybe just reinforces. He's like, oh, okay, I know that this gets my dad going or my mom, and so I'm going to use this now as a tool to elicit a response from them. So really what we want to do is try and not add fuel to that fire. And try not to react to the bad language in the moment. try, as challenging as it might be, to stay calm and help your son to try and bring down that heightened emotional state. And, you know, afterwards, when things are calm, maybe that's when you have the conversation. That's when the rational brain is back online and you can sit down and say, you know, when you say those things, that really hurts me because, you know, when I was a child, we weren't allowed to use that language. And so I found it really kind of offensive. And, you know, I'm just wondering, is there another way that we can understand what's going on for you and how to meet that need? It comes back to, Magella, what you said about, you know, if we just try and eliminate the behavior without understanding what's driving it, it's going to come up in another way. Okay. So I'm just conscious of time, and so hopefully that was helpful, Lou. Anything to add to that, Magella, before we move on to the next question?
No, I think that's, and I am conscious of time too, and people's time, and there are some questions there. There's one about a practical.
Any other questions you want to take
practical
there?
advice for a parent of a 6-year-old who will often bounce off the walls when we have visitors, adult visitors, or when his parents are talking to other adults in his presence. His logical brain clearly goes offline. Well, yeah, that's any practical advice. Well, we touched on that, Emma. I mean, when you're in a full emotional, maybe meltdown, the child is so overloaded. There is no access to logical mind at that point. So it is about creating a safe place for that child, for your child. And that might mean, you know, taking your child into maybe another space, or just using, like, sometimes using the breath. And we do this in the group, you know, using the breathing with your child can be really, really helpful, because our breath is our anchor. It's our most grounding thing. So even saying, okay, to your child, you know, Magella, let's just take a breath together, and you again model that, you know, just take that breath. And so that very often works for children when they're very emotionally dysregulated, that they're in emotional meltdown, because their system does not feel good at that point. So they would welcome some regulation. So even doing that, like taking a breath, having them do that with you, maybe holding their hands, or maybe not. If they're very dysregulated, they won't want you to touch them. But using the breath can be a really helpful technique.
Yeah, that's so important. And you know what's interesting here as well, Emma's commented, you know, that their 6-year-old, they'll bounce off the wall. So it's not clear if they're kind of, you know, full of excitement and energy, or, you know, if it's more a kind of a frustration thing. So again,
or an
this
attention
is where
speaking.
Exactly. So this is
seeking.
where kind of diving a little bit beneath the surface of the behavior to understand what's the driving. For example, if, as Magella said, you know, they're overwhelmed and it's too much, then, you know, the function, the need might be giving them the skill to be able to calm down. Whereas if it's a social attention thing, like they're just so excited, there's visitors in the house and they want to do whatever they can to kind of engage them, then it's about, okay, then maybe the underlying function is something different, and you need to take a different approach. So it might be kind of, you know, providing that social attention in another way. And look, as we know, kids with ADHD, that's one of the core features, is kind of, you know, butting in and interrupting people. They have difficulty waiting their turn to engage with others. So that is one of the core features, certainly. But thinking about, you know, well, what's the need in the moment? Like, if you ask yourself the question, if I could put words on the behavior, what's the message that it's telling me? And then can you think about, well, how can I teach them a way of getting that need met in a more kind of effective or adaptive way?
Just and I see, sorry, Danny, just to add to that, because I see that Emma put in that it seems to be connecting, seeking behavior. And so there you have it. So how do you address that? And we know that children love, I mean, we're all hardwired for connection, but they love attention. And so how else can you give them that attention? And maybe naming that for them to help them understand it. Sorry, Danny.
Yeah.
I mean, there's several questions here. I'm just
there's
really
a lot
conscious
coming in, you know, and I'm conscious of time as well. So just there's one here about, is it always best to get an assessment if you think they may have ADHD or not, or ADD? They're not hyper, but but possibly a mild version? Does an official assessment always benefit them? What I would say is with ADHD and other neurodevelopmental differences like autism, for example, they exist on a spectrum. So many of us will know, and particularly for parents of children with ADHD, they'll probably see a lot of their own behavioral traits in their kids. ADHD, it's not like doing a COVID test where, a little red line appears on a stick and it's yes or no. These things exist on a spectrum. And so what I would say is that look for evidence of the challenges across different settings. So if it's particularly inattentiveness, is your child struggling with paying attention in school, struggling to organize their belongings, losing things, looking out the window? But do they also experience that at home? Is it affecting them on the football pitch? Is it affecting them when they're doing their hobbies? Are they constantly kind of starting things and leaving them? Can they not watch a movie all the way through? So what I would suggest is that if you see some of these behaviors across different settings, and if it's having a kind of a negative impact on your child's life, if it's affecting their ability to function in school, if it's having a negative impact on their self-esteem, then an assessment might be worth pursuing. If not, then it might be the fact that, okay, different children, they have some inattentive traits from time to time, but that's what I would kind of advise there. I'm conscious that we're over time
Really
now.
over time.
There's one question here about a child physically lashing out, which is always really difficult. And again, we'll go back to, first of all, the most important thing is if somebody's being physically aggressive, it's about making the situation safe. Okay. So sometimes it is about trying to remove your child from the situation if they're going to harm themselves or somebody else. And then again, it's like really trying to understand, well, what's behind that and what need does the aggression meet? Because if it's with one parent and with another, the key thing here is to try and teach your child that aggression will not be an effective way of getting what they want, but not just trying to eliminate the aggression, really trying to give them another way of having that need met.
Yeah, and understanding the underlying cause of that. I think that's really important. And with his 16-year-old, I mean, that's, so obviously levels of frustration are high, and there's something that's so unmanageable for him within himself that he wants to offload it. And he may offload it more with his mom because he feels perhaps that he gets away with it more, that maybe she has a different way of meeting that than dad. You say that he acts out with mom, but not with dad. And so, but it is really about sitting down and trying to understand clearly. He's really struggling emotionally, maybe socially, maybe lots of different areas, and is using the aggression because that's all he knows how will make an impact. So again, it's probably trying to sit down and understand, what else can we do in this situation?
Yeah, absolutely. There's one final, I think we've probably time for just one more. I know we've gone over, but we want to be able to kind of respond to some of these. One issue here is that constant issue getting our 16-year-old out to school training. Family, always last minute and chaotic. I'm sure loads of people can relate to this. He's having difficulty organizing himself. We try not to do things for him, but just we're conscious of allowing him to take responsibility for his behavior in time. And any tips? Okay. Oh, this we've all been here, and this is like, a constant daily struggle is getting out on time with, some degree of without completely losing all your stress marbles. I think what might be helpful in a scenario like this is kind of stacking the odds in favor of him being organized. So if you leave it totally up to him, it's not happening. Okay. So what we might do is kind of begin to introduce different kind of prompts that will help him. Like we all have prompts and aids that help us every day in our life. Most of us, it's on the phone, the calendar's on the phone. We'd forget to organize things if we don't have these things that remind us. And so what I would suggest is sitting down with your son and the term scaffolding comes to mind here. So when we try and shape a behavior, we put a scaffolding in place. So we would set out all of the different steps that are required for this behavior and get him involved. He has to be involved in this process, because you can't just give it to him and expect him to do it. He won't do it. You'll have to get his buy-in. So sit down and just help him recognize, look, yeah, this is stressful on everybody. It's no fun. What can we try and do about it? And by scaffolding, I would say what you're doing is you're putting in place a lot of the supports to help him succeed. And as he kind of masters one step, it might be the fact that you're putting in place 4 of the 5 steps initially and getting him to do the last step, and then removing the scaffolding bit by bit. So it's not all at once. It's kind of putting the supports in place, building it with him, getting him to buy into it, and then slowly kind of removing some of those supports and allowing him to succeed, to do it independently and autonomously.
I think to feel that sense of autonomy, because we all crave autonomy, particularly in our own world. And if that's recognized by others in us, that's a really positive feeling. So, you know, creating that sense of autonomy for him, rather than kind of, you know, making the rules and, again, that kind of directing the behavior too much. So giving it back to him. So what would work for you? Even one thing. And sometimes one thing is enough, because if we crowd and we create too many rules and steps, then particularly the ADHD brain are not able to hold that. They're not able to work with that.
Right. Well,
okay.
I think we've kind of run out of time now, Magella. So I just want to thank everybody for attending. Really, thanks for the questions are always great, because they're real life scenarios and they get us thinking about these issues. Really hope you enjoyed tonight and got something out of it. And as I said, if you would like to join our 6-week program, you can contact us on the details below. And yeah, I hope you have an enjoyable evening.
Enjoy the gorgeous evening.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everybody. Thanks, Inda.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for your support.
Bye-bye.